She arrived at his ranch with storms in her eyes and chains no one could see. He untied the rope, but in doing so, he bound himself to her courage. In a land where mercy was rare and survival was hard, they learned that freedom was something you had to defend together. Let's get started. Storm winds rattled the old ranch house, and dust hissed through the cracks in the boards like ghosts trying to get in. The ropes around her wrists weren't tight, but they stood like reminders of every place she'd ever been held against her will. She wasn't tied by force. She had asked for it herself, her voice steady, but her eyes trembling in ways words could not explain. Trust in the wildlands was fragile as spring grass. When she whispered, "Untie me, I crave," it was not a plea for touch, but for breath that belonged to her. His hand shook as he reached for the knots. He had tied those knots slow, careful, deliberate, not to restrain, but to let her feel safe from her own storms. He had once been a man of the law, the kind who believed fences and rules could keep darkness out. But the frontier had changed him. It had stripped him, carved him, left him carrying silence heavier than saddlebags of iron. She had arrived at his ranch like a stray wind, thin, hungry, and half-ghost. She didn't speak her story. She didn't have to. The bruises beneath her skin told enough. When he loosened the first knot, she drew in a breath like she hadn't breathed in days. Not shallow panic, not weak relief, but a breath carved from the deepest part of living. The fire beside them crackled, sparks jumping like tiny suns. Outside, thunder rolled across the open plains, and the horses in the corral shifted nervously, sensing something they couldn't name. Her eyes remained locked on him. There was no fear, only trust so bare it shook him more than any threat ever had. He had held rifles steady during shootouts, but never felt his hands shake like this. She stood slowly, rope falling from her wrists like shed skin. The light of the hearth painted her in warm flickers, showing the faint scars along her arms, the long history carved into her. She didn't hide them. She didn't rush. She only stood straight, shoulders pulled back, as if remembering she had owned them once. He expected tears, collapse, shaking, but she simply breathed. "Thank you," she whispered. 2 words small enough to be lost in the storm outside. Yet they thundered louder than the sky. He didn't answer. He didn't have the language for this kind of courage. He asked her if she wanted to sit. She didn't. She walked to the window and looked at the land beyond, the endless stretch of golden grass and dark earth soaked by rain. This land was harsh, but it allowed no lies. It made you face what you were. Her breath fogged the glass. "I ain't going back," she said quietly. He didn't ask where. He didn't need names. Names out here were like smoke, used once, then gone. But he knew the kind of men who created scars like the ones she carried. He had seen them. He had once been one. He poured her warm tea instead of whiskey. She noticed. Her lips trembled not in grief but in surprise. No one had ever chosen kindness instead of numbness for her. She drank slow, hands wrapped around the tin cup as though holding something delicate. She asked his name and he gave it, voice low. She repeated it like weighing it on her tongue. The storm softened outside, thunder rolling away, like the land itself was holding its breath for them. She sat finally near the fire, warmth coloring her cheeks back to life. He didn't question her. He knew that survival stories force themselves out only when the soul is ready. So he told her something instead. He told her about the time he lost his brother in the Boundary River flood, how he blamed himself for not being faster, how guilt settled inside him like a rattlesnake waiting to strike. Her eyes softened, not pity but recognition. Pain meeting pain is a silent language. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt sunlight inside his chest. She spoke then, just a few words, enough to show the shape of her journey. A traveling caravan, a man who smiled too easily, promises with nothing under them. A night of running under moonlight so bright it felt like a witness. She didn't describe the rest. She didn't need to. The world could do unspeakable things without needing to be spoken of. He listened with the patience of mountains. No interruptions, no questions, just the steady presence of someone who would not turn away. The night deepened. Rain faded into soft mist. The house settled, wood creaking like an old horse stretching its bones. She lay near the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket he offered. She slept without the flinching jerks of nightmares. He stayed awake, watching the embers, knowing tomorrow would bring questions. A woman running from the past could not remain unseen for long. Trouble rode fast in the west, faster than forgiveness and always hungry. But he felt no fear. Something had shifted in the room tonight. Something new had begun. Morning came quiet. Pale winter light spilled across the floorboards. She woke slow, like someone remembering what gentle felt like. She moved closer to the window, watching the land breathe under dawn. He joined her. No words were needed. The day waited for them to choose their shape. She finally spoke. "I don't want to be owned ever again." He nodded. "You won't be." She looked at him, searching for the lie. She found none. Trust settled in her eyes like dawn settling into day. They stepped outside, the ranch land stretching wide. The storm washed away. The horses lifted their heads, recognizing him. He handed her the reins of the calmest mare he owned. She hesitated, then took them, fingers steady. She swung into the saddle like someone reclaiming a birthright. The wind caught her hair, the sun rising behind her like a promise. He stood beside his horse, one hand resting on the saddle horn, watching her breathe in the world. Not captured, not broken, alive. They did not know what waited, but they knew they would face it together, and sometimes that was enough for a beginning. Understood. I will expand your part 2 into a 1,200-word professional continuation. Around 12 paragraphs, each 100 words. No headings, no numbering, no explicit content. Emotional Western tone. Complete story movement. Here we go. When the rope fell to the floorboards, she didn't run. She didn't collapse. She simply stood there, back straight, spine like iron tempered in heartbreak. The rancher had expected wildness, maybe relief, maybe tears. But what he saw instead hollowed him to the bone. She looked at him with a freedom so fierce it hurt to witness. "You kept me safe," she breathed. He swallowed because he knew now that every choice, every touch, every word had to be careful as handling wildfire. He had freed her body, but her heart, her trust, that was something he could still lose. The storm outside slowed into a distant rumble, like a beast satisfied after roaring. She stared at the window, rain streaking down like old grief being washed from the land. He stepped back, giving her space, knowing closeness could be as heavy as chains if offered at the wrong moment. Her hands lowered to her sides, palms open, bare of ropes and fear. The silence wasn't tense. It was full of something sacred, something raw. She was not the same woman who had walked into the ranch, and he was not the same man who had tied the knots. She walked slowly across the wooden floor, bare feet whispering over old boards scarred by years of living. The ranch smelled of hay, smoke, and the faint sweetness of rain leaking in through the porch. She touched the table, the chair, the ledge by the hearth, as though placing herself in this place piece by piece, relearning what it meant to exist without watching her own shadow. He watched her, ready to speak but choosing silence. Could break delicate things. Sometimes the quiet was a prayer. Finally she turned to him. Her voice was steady. "You think I'm fragile?" He shook his head. "No, just hurt." She studied him, eyes sharp like a hawk's. She wanted truth, not comfort. He chose truth. "You're strong," he said. "Stronger than anyone who tried to break you." She exhaled slowly, and the room shifted. Not in movement, but in meaning. For the first time since she arrived, she believed someone saw her more than her scars. And that belief was heavier than any rope. Later, the rancher set more wood on the fire, and she helped without needing to be asked. They worked side by side, each movement quiet, practiced, almost gentle. When flame rose again, lighting the room in amber warmth, she sat across from him. He could feel her gaze resting on him, the way sunlight rests on the skin, light but impossible to ignore. "I need to tell you something," she said. He nodded. She didn't rush. The story didn't spill, it unfolded. She told him of a family she almost had, a cabin near a river, laughter that once lived in her voice. Then came men who took what didn't belong to them, who believed power was their right because no law reached that far into the plains. She had survived, But survival had not been mercy. It had been memory carved into the bone. She had run for months, hiding behind false names, borrowed prayers, silence. She told it plainly, not for pity, but because truth demanded to be witnessed by someone who would not turn away. When she finished, the fire had burned low. He did not try to speak apologies or promises. He simply said, "I hear you," and somehow those 3 words mattered more than vows could. She closed her eyes for a moment, as though letting the weight inside her settle, somewhere it could be carried instead of fought. The ranch outside was quiet now, land washed clean and waiting. She was tired but not defeated. He saw that. He admired it. He feared its cost. Morning came pale and silver. Dew coated the grass, and the horses snorted soft clouds into the cool air. She stepped outside with him, breathing in the fresh scent of wet soil and distant pine. "I want to stay," she said, voice nearly lost to the wind. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the horizon stretching after forever. "If you stay," he said, "you stay free. No one holds you here, not me, not this land." She smiled faintly. "That's the only way I'd stay." And something settled between them, steady as fence posts driven deep. Days passed, marked by simple tasks. Feeding horses, mending fences, stacking hay. Work was a kind of healing, a rhythm that let the mind breathe. She grew stronger, skin warming in the sun, voice growing clearer. He found himself laughing again, small things at first. A stubborn goat, a crooked fence board that refused to sit straight. She teased him for it just a little, and his heart remembered gentleness. Sometimes they spoke of nothing. Sometimes they spoke of everything. The land became their shared language, but the world always remembers those it tries to break. One evening, dust rose on the far road. A rider, then another, then a third. The rancher's jaw tightened. He knew the shape of trouble before it reached the gate. She saw it too. Her hand didn't shake. She did not hide behind him. She stood beside him. That changed something in him, deep and irreversible. He had seen bravery. He had seen terror. But the courage of the already broken was sharper than steel. The riders stopped a few yards out, faces the kind carved from cruelty and careless hunger. They spoke her old name like a debt they planned to collect. She said nothing. The rancher stepped forward, voice low, steady, like a mountain refusing to move. And something in his voice made even the wind stop to listen. The men laughed first. Then one reached for his gun. The rancher didn't hesitate. 3 shots rang out, sharp as lightning splitting the sky. When the echoes faded, the dust began to settle. She stood there, breathing slow, no fear left. The cost of freedom had come again, and once more she had survived it. The rancher holstered his gun. She didn't look at the bodies. She looked at him. And in that look, every unspoken vow lived, not ownership, not rescue, partnership. A life chosen, not taken. She walked back toward the ranch house. He followed. The storm clouds on the horizon were clearing, leaving only open sky. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. The land around them already understood. They had rebuilt more than shelter. They had rebuilt themselves.